Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with director Gavin Hood of the film Eye in the Sky, moderated by Deadline Hollywood's Pete Hammond, recorded at the Landmark West LA.
Hi there, my name's Pete Hammond. I'm going to moderate tonight. Did you all enjoy Eye in the Sky? Is that a great film? It's a really amazing movie. 97% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. Best reviewed movie of this year. Let me introduce you to the director of the film. He's an Academy Award winner. Of course, a great movie called Tsotsi in 2005. Has done many other films since then. Rendition, X-Men Origins, Wolverine, and Ender's Game. And this one, extraordinary movie. Please welcome Gavin Hood.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Grab a mic. Congratulations. Thank you for coming out tonight because I know you're just off the trail, been to a lot of cities, promoting the movie and getting people to, talk about it and come out and see it.
Yeah, so if I have a bit of a throaty voice, I'm slightly losing it. But, wow. First of all, the cinema's full. And secondly, you're staying. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nice. I think they're staying too because there's so much to talk about with this movie.
Yeah.
It brings up so many interesting things about what's going on today. I wouldn't call it a war movie, but it's certainly about modern warfare, but about morality and what's going on and how we're dealing with this, which is a whole new world. Mm-hmm. When did you get involved with this? Because this is so topical now that I think when you probably started to make this movie, things have changed a lot even since then.
Well, that's a great question. Guy Hibbert, whose screenplay I think we should shout out for Guy Hibbert, is a great screenplay. Guy began writing this about 8 years ago when drones were sort of, and we've all become slowly more and more aware of them. I read the script, a draft of the script 3 years ago. And at first when I read it, some of you may have had this reaction, is this really where we're at, and these teeny tiny drones, and the first thing I did was I thought, is this sci-fi or is this really where it's going? So I was a bit skeptical, and I immediately did what we all do nowadays, is dive into the internet and started researching, and then I called certain people that I knew, and I'm an ex-lawyer, so I knew some lawyers on certain, and then I spoke to people in the military, and before I knew it, I was down this rabbit hole, and absolutely fascinated. I spent about a month researching and putting together visuals and things before I felt ready to take a meeting with producers. We had some great producers, Jed Doherty and Colin Firth, two people who I think as their first film out was very bold and wanting to do something to get us talking. Yeah. And it's been 3 years. And so at sometimes we go, when is this technology going to be outdated? And the only thing I will say is those teeny tiny drones we can talk about, the little bird. You can look at TED Talks where there's a wonderful TED Talk where tiny drones are thrown up in the air above the audience and they all know where each other are in relation to each other. So technology is moving very fast. The funny thing was when I talked to guys, a particular defense contractor who made the Hummingbird, that flies and that does what ours does. Ours, I think, is a little cooler. It's a little more camouflaged. And then these tiny drones, just so you do know, our little Beetle is our own design. We didn't want to be sued by anyone for stealing. So they're trying it in all kinds of shapes. There are dragonflies. There are little square boxes that you'll see on the Air Force video with a bad voiceover that goes, MAVs, micro aerial vehicles. It sounds like a bad Hollywood movie trailer. And they talk about how they'll draw power from the sun or from power lines if they sit on them, and how they move in swarms. And you go, ah! And then, just to creep you out completely, this movie will be out of date as soon as those little guys are armed, weaponized. Because all you do with that little fellow is fly him down and boom, or a little anthrax in the nose. Gets creepy very fast. And then add to that a little face recognition software. So fly it in here and it hunts for you in the crowd. Knows who you are.
Wow.
So I don't know how soon this thing gets out of date. Oh, the funny part was, funny. His biggest concern was, Gavin, it's not the cameras, the cell phones have got great everything, it's the battery. I said, what do you mean? He said, it sucks a lot of juice to power flight and to transmit HD video. So the smaller you get, the smaller the battery has to be. And he said, what's holding us back is battery technology. So now I don't know whether I want Elon Musk to advance the battery technology quicker or slower.
I wonder if real life copies art and they get ideas from you.
Oh boy, now it's my fault. I guess it's a mixture. It's really, you'll see on those, the Air Force YouTube video on MAVs, micro aerial vehicles, if you want to be freaked out. It's kind of where they're going in the future. But that video was already out 3.5, 4 years ago when I researched it. So
now, well, let's talk about the consequences of all of this and what's so brilliant about this movie and its concept. It puts a human face on this and the morality involved, which I haven't quite seen dramatized ever like this. And I thought it was so effective. Not just your filmmaking, which is incredibly suspenseful, and watching that girl try to sell that bread, but all of that, but just what's behind it and the decisions and all of those different people around the world all focusing on one thing and then going home to their home somewhere, their nice, safe little home. It's a different way of fighting.
It's a very different way. And as many of you probably already know, there's a whole field of post-traumatic stress disorder that's now being discussed by psychologists, which affects people such as the drone pilot, but even people like the Helen Mirren character, but more so the drone pilot who actually pulls the trigger, where there's even a new term being thrown around, not PTSD, but PITS, which is perpetrator-induced traumatic stress, which I think is an incredibly clever name, because part of the stress, and there's the whole question of whether we should or shouldn't be using drones, we should talk about later on, but just in terms of those who operate these drones, and I spoke to drone pilots, and you should know we had a drone pilot who was also an F-16 and F-15 fighter pilot for 10 years, flew in Iraq, been flying drones for 6 years, now in the reserves. He was our consultant, and you need someone like that on the set because you don't want Aaron Paul or Phoebe Fox going, which button do I push, and feeling self-conscious as an actor. You want to get all that technical stuff out of the way so you can get back to just working the emotional beat. But so one of the things that was interesting to us was talking to drone pilots who suffer twice as much PTSD, or perhaps this new term, PITS, as fighter pilots. And we asked why. It seems that there is a combination of actually an element of guilt that you're not actually there. Because as Chris said to me, when I flew F-16s, my adrenaline was pumping because I might get shot down. It was highly unlikely, but I was in. Then the second thing is I dropped my payload and I left. I didn't have to stay for 12 hours and watch and then go back and watch the bodies and count the bodies. And I have very ambivalent feelings about all this, as I'm sure you do. I mean, in some ways, you should look at the body. It makes you accountable. On the other hand, when you've got 24, 25-year-olds, and the sensor operators, played by Phoebe, are as young as 19, in the hot seat with 9 months of training, that's why we chose to have in the movie a pilot who had not yet pulled the trigger. And that's because when you speak to drone pilots, sometimes it can take as long as 2 years if you're flying over more surveillance-type areas like Somalia usually. If you're in Afghanistan and Iraq in defined conflict zones, you're likely to pull a trigger much sooner than that. But there's a moment when every drone pilot actually takes human life, pulls the trigger for the first time. And that's the moment where the stress, they either learn to deal with it or they don't. Or in the case of Brandon Bryant and some of the others who've spoken out against it, who were drone pilots and sensor operators for a long time, at a certain point, in Brandon Bryant's case, it was when he killed a child. They told him to write it up as hitting a dog, and he couldn't do it anymore. So there's a whole range of reactions amongst these pilots.
What about you as the director, as you went through this project and worked so closely with it? Did it change your view of any of this?
I'm kind of deeply disturbed by it, and my... let me try and say this. First of all, I don't know, and I don't know that any of us can know, exactly what we would do if we were presented with this particular set of circumstances. And bear in mind that this is a particular set of circumstances. Not every drone strike is quite like this. There aren't always suicide vests. There are signature strikes taking place in the tribal areas of Pakistan. There are strikes taking place where you don't have to go up as far up the kill chain because you're in a defined conflict zone, meaning you're working in Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a particular set of circumstances which would be similar if you were in Yemen. In other words, countries with whom we have not declared war or not at war. And that's where it gets so murky. Because where is the battlefield? The battlefield has always been defined geographically. This place, Iraq, or this place, Afghanistan, or this place, Nazi Germany, and these are the zones, right? And then it was with armies against one another. Part of the question for lawyers as well as philosophers is, well, what is the battlefield? Does the battlefield now attached to the individual that we're hunting? I mean, are we at war or are we hunting? We're hunting individuals with a certain ideological, extremist ideology. So does the battlefield go wherever they go, including into our own country? And if it does that mean weapons of war, which is what a Hellfire missile is, can be used? And so there's these terms in the military called the kill box. And a kill box, in terms of this theory, is a little box that surrounds this person. And if they move into a place, that box extends vertically up into the sky so that now the zone, the battlefield, is that zone. And just out here is not a battlefield. So what happened in Baker's, San Bernardino, yes, thank you. If they'd witnessed that, if that scenario was our scenario, and instead of the gun, or maybe with the guns arming up, if we actually observed that, if we had a beetle inside and a drone above, what is that environment? Because you're kind of combining warfare with what was traditionally policing. Police don't usually use Hellfire missiles. And we could talk about this for hours, but just for yourselves, I mean, just don't think, please, that this film offers you every answer. What I loved about Guy Hibbert's script is he doesn't preach, he doesn't tell you what to think. I got to the end of reading it, and all I knew was I wanted to know more. And I think if this film demystifies what a Reaper drone and a Hellfire are, if it hints at where this technology is going in terms of smaller and smaller weaponized drones, then we sort of owe it to ourselves to engage in getting to know where this is going, because as citizens, I guess we vote and we have to think. The drone is a weapon. How do you deploy the weapon, and what is the effect of the way you deploy the weapon in terms of either winning people over to your point of view or turning them against you? That's the question. I do think there's moments where war might be the only way. The question is, are we using the weapon strategically, smartly? Wow. So if anything from this film, what I hope comes from it is just more conversation between people of differing views in order to arrive at perhaps a better strategy in the use of the weapon. It's a great question. Has there been significant blowback? There is massive blowback going on in the tribal areas of Pakistan. Massive. When you kill a wedding party, which is one of the famous ones, there's blowback. And we don't know how much blowback. We don't know. So let me give you an example that's going on in our country right now that concerns me about blowback. You have one bad policeman shoot one innocent person of color, black person, and you get Ferguson. So you have to help me answer that question. You take out a wedding party, whether you see it now or not, you don't think that that whole community hates us for that error? Well, that's a different question. I mean, no, it's a great question. So we're in that zone which neither of us can come to an adequate conclusion of. What we're doing, we have more extremism happening rather than less. So my view is something we at least have to think about whether our strategies are making it worse or better. But there's no right answer. You may be right, I don't know. Yeah, it is an unlikely situation. Here's why we did this. It's perfectly valid. It is an unlikely situation in the sense that we have constructed a set of scenarios that increasingly move you through all the way to the logical worst or best case scenario. And you're left asking, I think, even in the best case scenario, did we do the right thing? In other words, we have suicide vests, many scenarios where the suicide vests are not there. But in order to put out as many of the moral, ethical, and legal arguments as possible in 1 2-hour movie and at least get the conversation going, I will own the fact that the situation we've contrived is a very particular set of facts. It's not the same every day. But what happened in San Bernardino, if that drone was there, would be your facts. This is not so unlikely that it doesn't help us have the conversation. If I made the film, here's to your question, and I worried about this. I made a film called Rendition about torture. It was a really tough sell. You know why? Because it just polarized people. The people who were anti-torture loved the movie. The people who were pro-torture hated me, and they didn't talk to each other. So part of what I went with Guy, rightly or wrongly, is that he offers perspectives from multiple points of view and says, what do you think? And if we made the movie of, here's that pilot who pulls the trigger and kicks ass, which has happened, it's out there. It's not, you can go find it. I don't know if it brings the two opposing views together for a meaningful discussion, as opposed to just pointing a finger at one side and the other said, well, that's an unusual thing when they yell like that. Mostly they're good. Yeah, they're good. What do we think? It's tricky. The gentleman's just very kindly saying that the film helps us cut through the fog of war, and I do think that it's important. Your interpretation is as valid as anyone else's. We don't know. If it's just food for thought, and that's what I think Guy Hibbert's script does so well, is helps us have a conversation as opposed to just point fingers at one another. And God knows we need that, I think. So thank you for your question.
Eye in the
Thank
Sky.
you so much, folks.
Open now,
Thank
but
you,
going
thank you,
wider,
thank you.
so tell your friends.
Yes, please
Thanks.
tell your friends. Thank you. Very much appreciated, folks. Thank you.
This is Colonel Powell. She's going to walk you through the capture of Aisha Al-Hadi, a.k.a. Susan Danford.
We have intelligence of a meeting between Danford and numbers 4 and 5 on our most wanted list. We believe that they're connected to the recent suicide bombing in Kenya. We have information that they will be in this house today. This is an operation to capture, not kill.
Range 22,000 feet.
You have your orders, Lieutenant. Your job is to be their eye in the sky.
Yes, ma'am.
I have to know if Danford is inside and who is with her. That's Danford.
Well, this changes things.
What's happening?
We're seeing a suicide vest and a whole bunch of explosives.
What's the plan, General?
We have the ability to strike a target with considerable accuracy.
I came here to witness a capture, not a targeted assassination.
Dozens of lives are at stake if these men leave.
We need to put a hellfire through that roof right now.
Weapon is armed. What's that?
Given the new circumstances, I think we should abort.
You have number 4 and 5 on the president's kill list in your sights. You are putting the whole mission at risk because of one collateral damage issue?
Minister.
We are locked into this kill chain. I need legal clearance to strike.
I'm the pilot in command responsible for releasing the weapon. I will fire when this girl's out of the way.
There is a lot more at stake than you see in this image.
If they kill 80 people, we win the propaganda war. If we kill one child, they do.
We've got 2 suicide bombers inside that house, and no one wants to take responsibility for pulling the trigger.
We lost visual.
Christ.
We need a decision.
Ready.
Right now.
3.
Go!
2.
Wait.
1.